Welcome back, Ventures. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am MR, and together with Taurus, we fell in love. It's this time of year, a Valentine's Day special. It's time to get all lovey-dovey, whisper sweet nothings, and confess your true feeling. Taurus, since you are known for being infatuated with romance VNs, please enlighten us. What makes the romance in VNs so special?
Why must you always make stuff up about me? You always introduce me with the worst things you could say, the total opposites, MR. How dare you?
Worst? Worst?
No. I hope everyone had a happy Valentine's Day. But I'd also like to cover the various kinds of romance you see in visual novels. Because after all, romance is one of the strongest themes that you'll ever see in this wide genre. And I think there's a variety of ways that it can be done. For one thing that I really like about visual novels is that we get to see all sorts of different stages of a romance. The way I see it, the whole idea of a romance between two characters has a lot of, I guess you could say, phases to it. There's like the initial meeting, the meet cute moment. There's the whole part of growing closer together. There's the confession. You get the actual relationship where the two of them are official. And then you get like the whole marriage stuff and tying the knot and beyond. And one thing I like about visual novels is that you do tend to see a lot of different stages. Sometimes, sometimes you get to see, something all the way through in a character route. Other times you get dropped in the middle. Other titles have a lot more of a focus on some parts of these than others. But like I mentioned, there's a lot of variety between all sorts of different visual novels and how they handle it. Let's take a look. Let's say the first romance kind of title that comes to mind is Lunaria by Key. And I feel like that's one of the most standard kinds of romance stories you'll see in a visual novel. Our main character suddenly meets this Lunar Q girl. They have, a very interesting meeting, and she proves her usefulness in his racing career. They grow closer together. They go through all sorts of very interesting twists and turns about discovering each other's past and, the hidden depths to them. And finally, we get our very emotional, I guess you could say, ending. And, without spoiling anything that happens in that visual novel, it's got a lot of feels to it, And I think that's the most standard kind of romance story you'll see in a typical visual novel, right, Amar? You get like that, the introduction of the character where the main character gets to meet the heroine alongside the reader, and then it advances, and then you get that super emotional ending of a confession and being official, right?
Absolutely. With the end part, it all depends on a VM. Some titles explore more past that. Some titles end the moment they go official. So it all depends. But ultimately, the way you describe it is exactly the standard approach how they portray the romance. And in preparation for this title, I was thinking, what are the titles I associate, especially given the steps we want to talk about and different phases in relationships? I feel like the one that keeps popping to my mind the most from my recent reads has to go back to Mashiro Hero Symphony. That title had exactly the cycle of the initial meeting, in which the protagonist switches school due to merger and is put in a situation he has to prove himself along with other boys to the other half of the merged school that was previously all girls. Now it's a co-ed. and there's friction there. But he steps up to the challenge, and through that, finds someone who really appreciates that approach. And over the course of the story, you can see, will they one day kind of deal? Will it succeed? Will it not? There are some people against mingling those two boys with the girls, like, it keeps it interesting, and it still tries to sell that story and how it developed over time.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about that development, it's like, that's the whole meat of the story. That's everything that drives the plot forward. That's all the stuff you enjoy in reading the VN, right?
Exactly. Although I wouldn't say I necessarily search for romance. Now, granted, okay? In my notes, I said to myself, okay, I need to write down the most memorable initial meeting. Okay. Some time ago, I spoke about Iyashki title. I think it's called like that. The Healing Runner of Yen. It was made for loving you. And how it is somewhat safe of a title. It tries to portray a protagonist stuck in a dead-end job with a very grayish and a repetitive life. And the story introduces something one day. Someone is collapsed on the doorstep, and this is the meeting. He meets up Eve, the love interest of that title. And it's so convenient, so cheesy. It did not make any impact. You know what did? Hilarious enough to compare that to Sayanota.
Oh my god.
Sayanota has such an amazing introduction to Saya. I know it's not a romance VN, but ultimately develops in some sort of relationship there. But it has such a great impact on initial meeting. I remember to this day. And it's only beaten from the initial meeting by only one other title. It's Fate and Are You My Master?
That's an iconic
I don't know,
scene.
maybe because I've seen so many animes that start with someone running with the toes in her mouth and crashing into the protagonist, conveniently enough. Those convenient initial meetings, just like, whatever.
Oh, that's a classic.
I know it's a classic. I know.
Or when the girl is, walking down the school hallways and then bumps with a guy, and it's like, the papers go flying, and he offers, oh no, hold up, I have to help you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And then they're picking up the papers, and their hands touch, and they both look at each other, and it's, and then they blush, and they get shy. It's a classic, it's a cliche for a reason.
It's definitely a cliche, that's true.
Speaking, of typical stuff, one, I think the best I've ever seen it done is in Majikoi, actually, with Momoyo's route. Because, that one, it's very typical high school. Our main character is the high school boy in a very weird and kind of slapstick comedy setup, but still. After all through the events of the common route, Momoyo's route starts off with our MC confessing to her. He's like, oh, yes, will you go out with me and whatever?
Okay.
And she rejects him. But that's the beginning. Yeah, because then he spends the whole route wooing her and trying to become a real man to measure up to her standards.
Okay.
And yeah, so the whole time it's like he's texting her, he's taking her out on a date, fighting, quote unquote, in combat, all with the ideas of showing that, hey, I can be a capable, real dude. And it's very simple, but like I said, the simple stuff is so good when you have the characters and the plot and, the very funny dialogue just all aligned together. A lot of stuff happens in that route, and some of it seems completely unrelated, but you're still all driving towards that ultimate goal. It's like it's showing the main character as he's growing and he's trying to improve himself to measure up. And I like it. It's not just, a romance story where it's just all very mushy, slice of life emotions. It's still striving for something. By the end of the route, several characters are different from the whole journey than they were at the start. That's the kind of journey that I like to see,
When you brought the journey, when you brought the development, and specifically the way protagonists have to prove that he's the man, I'm the one to choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to what I said was the best part of the Mashiro Era Symphony. Just that proving yourself worthy in the otherwise cold and or hostile environment, getting the approval of those students that weren't used to being put in the same class as boys, and winning over both the whole class as well as that chosen one. In this case, the one route I remember fondly is Miyu's route.
Why's that?
Why this in particular?
Yeah, why Miyu in particular?
For many different reasons, one of which this is a VN I've seen anime of, so this was nostalgic in a sense. Another one is in how they developed that route specifically. Once protagonist proven to that character, as well as to the rest of the class, that he's worthy, a new challenger appears, Sana.
Gasp.
A character that was very close friend with Miyu and tries to protect her quote unquote, but at the same time exhibits in a very tsunderish way feelings towards the protagonist. Yet, ultimately, in that battle of affection, loses to the main heroine. And like looking back, that was quite something, seeing how he fought for the heroine he chose and still had to prove to both, first, the environment in which he has been put in, to the heroine that he chose, as well as the sudden rival that appeared out of nowhere. Like, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, in a more spoilerific way, there were some dramatic developments of the course of the story and yada, yada, yada. I'm not going into too much into that. But it all culminated in a very nice package.
And I think that has more to do with the quality of a route than, a lot of people would like to admit. Is that it's not just about, I guess you could say the heroine's personality, the character design or whatever. A lot of it is also still in the visual novel's literary chops. How well it can write a story that makes me want to see the people involved succeed. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah, on the one hand, it's like, sure, that I kind of want to self-insert as the main character so I can get into a romance with my favorite waifu of the VN, la-di-da. But also, there's so much to a story that makes you care about seeing the characters involved have a happy relationship, live their happy life together. And part of that is involving multiple choices. I always like having choices involved in stories. Not just the kind that serve as affection points to determine whose route you go on after the common route. No, I mean the kind of choices that also allow for bad endings. Like, look at Katawa Shoujo. That's a great example. That's
a good example, yeah.
It's a visual novel that has a heavy emphasis on the romance part with the variety of romanceable heroines. But within each character route, there are also bad endings. If you make the wrong choices, then our poor main character and the heroine involved, they don't end on good terms. It's a bad ending, definitely.
May drift apart. I definitely remember to this day how careful you had to navigate the bacon by the end of
Yes.
You know what?
Yes,
Yeah.
poor Hanako. But yes, absolutely. And so I think that gives a lot more stakes to the story. It lends the
True.
reader to be a lot more involved and to be a lot more emotionally invested in hoping that everything goes well.
I have to ask, because on the topic of growing closer together, and I already know you're biased in this topic, fine. But where do you put childhood friend heroines? Because to some degree, they come in that title pre-packaged with some things that they already grew with the character, that being protagonist already. And part of the fun and from the reading experience is unraveling that from the standpoint of flashbacks.
Mm-hmm. I was actually going to ask you the same thing. What are your thoughts about childhood friend routes?
I'm first.
No, yeah, but exactly. I mean, that's a very interesting wrinkle. Just any sort of character that heavily involves flashbacks. Because, when I was talking about some of the, the common phases of romance in a visual novel, it's, what about the characters who you already have a sort of your own relationship with? In your case, like you said, the childhood friends, all of the material that's there as flashbacks to be revealed during the story. Like, the classic, the two kids promise each other, if we're both like 30 years old and we're both still unmarried, we'll marry each other. That silly little stuff, That's a flashback, and that obviously happens long beforehand in the story. But where does that play in, I think those kinds of flashbacks still serve as the whole the drama, the tension of them two getting together. So I still think that, sure, you don't have that meet cute moment of the characters initially meeting, they already know each other, but I still think that is very valuable fuel for showing how the two of them are growing closer together. I think that's still a very important part of the process.
Honestly, for me, when it comes to childhood friends, heroines, they have a unique opportunity, and on average, very often do involve parents of both families in the drama and or character development or relationship development. Because this is something that I feel like is a lot of the time skipped in romance VNs. Like, parents are not involved whatsoever. And even in the title, in which, for the current moment, parents are in another country, overseas, conveniently enough for the purposes of the story, for the childhood friend, oftentimes you can make an exception. But in the past, they were involved and they approved, and or protagonist proved himself in the eyes of the parents, and they said, oh yeah, I can entrust my daughter to you, something like that. And honestly, parents' involvement in romance is always a plus in my book, because that's another part of how that would transpire in a real life relationship, in which there will be a moment in which you have to prove yourself in the eyes of the parents. You have to have some sort of relationship with them as well. So oftentimes, childhood friends have that part of the story, because maybe for one part could be because they had involvement with the parents in the past, but maybe because those two families are closely known each other for some time, that the protagonist has some insight to the other party's parent. And often childhood friends have green hair, so that's also a plus, right?
They do? That's news to me.
Yeah.
Although you're right, it's for something that should be as obvious to teenagers as, the whole parent situation. It gets hand waved away in almost every story. It's like, don't worry about it.
Suddenly, for the duration of this title that we want to showcase, your parents are absent and you have your whole home for free. Go crazy. Like,
Go crazy. Exactly. That's why any times you do see a parent, that's a rarity. You gotta treasure it. Root Double.
yes.
Root Double has, the protagonist's mother as a, well, I don't want to say important character. Well, she is an important character, but she doesn't show up that often. But still, she's important. Speaking of Root Double, I just remembered there's a part in the main story. Like it doesn't really have the whole romanceable heroine parts. It has a lot of choices, but it's more of the action, avoid the bad endings kind of VN. But there's a part in it where the MC has a kiss with the childhood friend kind of character Mashiro. And then we get to the end and they keep it open-ended.
What?
They do the classic, anime thing of, oh, well, here's all the cute girls around the main character, and they all kind of sort of like him, probably, and he's just kind of oblivious / oh, I can't decide, so you just have a whole bunch of anime girls fawning over you.
You made it sound like there was a kiss and the game ended.
No, it's
okay. You made it sound like that to me.
It doesn't end, but
the biggest
there is
mystery is did he land or did he miss the kiss?
Get out of here! Yeah, it landed. Absolutely. There's a kiss, and you would think that, oh, okay, that's main heroine, that's the stuff, but nope, it just ends and it just kind of leaves it all up in the air. Like
she was just friendly, okay.
Well, how do I know if she likes me, man?
Exactly.
But that's the sort of thing you usually see in anime or light novels or whatever. And that's a big draw for people who like visual novels. You usually have these kinds of character routes where you can see things through to the end. That's for a lot of people, that's big appeal of visual novels.
Yeah, I agree. And I wanted to continue on the point that I started for childhood friend for one moment, because I wanted to transition from childhood friend, of which the example I brought was Nanoha from Baldur's Gate, in which for that particular heroine, for her particular route, both sides' parents were involved, this is so rare. It's not. I don't even want to talk about that. You had both sides' parents. Like, what the hell? But moving from that, the idea of reminiscence of memories of the past to see how the relationship developed is something I really, really loved in another title I spoke before. It was Yotsunoha. It was a title that was about time capsule. So after a period of time, characters that went their separate way will open a time capsule and reminisce of things that happened in the past. And I really liked how in those past memories you saw how those characters grew to like each other. And then you fast forward to now and they finally have the courage to move to the next step. Like, dang, that was actually really well done.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you really liked how I guess layered and measured that whole romance development was.
You know what? Layered is a very nice word, because it wasn't as convenient as they in the past confessed and went to the next step. No, for whatever reason, they had to split and go their separate ways, but promised each other to meet up again in the old school that closed, unbury their time capsule, reminisce, and then move forward with their life. Like, the sequence was very interesting and unique. Not something that typically happens in a romance VN.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Speaking of things that don't really happen in a romance VN, I have to give a big shout out to Making Lovers. I haven't read it, but I think it's pretty well known for its story, where the main character attends a speed dating session. And, you know,
Okay.
you meet the heroines and you just decide who you want to, you know, hang out with, in a sense. And that's it. That's the common route. Now you just go entirely into the character routes of you and, you know, this woman in a relationship, of trying to make things work out. I guess you could say it's a lot more realistic, pragmatic look at romance. The idea that it isn't that, oh, you already knew this person and you both, you know, fell in love with each other. It's, hey, you found someone who's open for a relationship and you're trying to hit it off with her and just, you know, develop into these kinds of emotions and, you know, long-term relationship kind of thing. Very different than what you see in a typical visual novel, right? So,
Absolutely. It's like,
yeah, it's the cool
in a
thing.
way, it's like the no nonsense. Okay, mission acquired. Let's go.
Exactly. I always like variety in all sorts of things. And so like I said, I haven't ever read Making Lovers, but that's something that's eternally on my backlog to check out one day because of how if it's different approach, you know. That's something I always like to see more variety in visual novels everywhere.
Jumping to a different extreme, but I remember that when you spoke about unique portrayal, the one that sticks to me in Grisaio, so a title that has multiple heroines of which each of them have an ending associated with them. One of the heroines has an ending so long in the future, it's shown from the perspective of when she's very old as a grandma and lovingly remembers the protagonist long after he's dead. And there is a very interesting portrayal of that love still being strong despite protagonist not being there for her. Like, I don't think I've ever read that in a VN.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, those kinds of, you know, far-flung in the future endings, you usually see that like an after credits scene or something. But still, oh my gosh, that hits hard, man. Oh,
yeah,
that's...
like I don't think I've ever read that in a VN. Holy crap. I was not prepared.
Oh,
Huh.
yeah. And then, of course, you know, it's not really befitting of the whole Valentine's Day mood, but, you know, then there's all the doomed romance stories. It's all the whole tragic side of love there as well, but it's like, okay, you know, we're not going to discuss that today.
Yeah. Also, on a unique end, somewhat aligned with the tragic you say, but I listed them in unique maybe to talk about. I had in Confessions. There are two memorable confessions, but the more unique one I wrote in Hatoful Boyfriend, BBL. Because that route is so different from others, especially from the perspective of those obtainable, I was going to say heroine, but in this way it was pigeons, and you were playing the female, and it was heroes, I guess.
It's an otome, yeah, man.
Yeah. I need to invite. So you've seen, while in the regular routes and the regular ending, you were trying to woo one of your favorite pigeons. In BBL, it was from the perspective of them confessing their feelings towards the protagonist. Like, damn. In addition to story being so much more serious, you've seen the inversion. Like, damn, I was impressed. That was definitely very unique.
Yeah. But, you know, just to reiterate, in case you've kind of already said this before, but what would you say is your favorite romance of all the visual novels you've read?
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what? Probably the one that just got stuck in my head and just cannot get out. I have to go to my number 2 most remembered confession of all. It has to go back to Amatsutsumi. It is
Amatsutsumi.
very, very well done, very unique and turbo emotional. In a funny way, uniquely, it's a I can fix him situation in which that heroine tries to fix up whatever is wrong with the protagonist.
Oh.
And I know I'm, for the sake of spoilers, I don't want to go into details. It has that vibe of fixing what fundamentally is broken with the protagonist, but they go about it in such an endearing way. Hotaru from Amatsutsumi is just on another level.
Nice. As for me, this is going to be a bit out of left field, but I would say Machikoi for Chris's route. And okay, I know Chris's route is infamous for a certain scene and how much of a train wreck her route becomes. And it's like, okay, yes, that's all very unfortunate. But at first, Chris's route is amazing. Because the dynamic between her and the main character is so good. It's like the main character of Machikoi, he's an underhanded tactician. He's willing to fight dirty and do whatever it takes to win and stuff. And Chris, she's very upstanding, all about justice and fair fights. And so naturally, the two of them do not get along at all. And so getting on Chris's route means seeing a lot of scenes of the two of them together, of the ways that they kind of get closer, but then they all just constantly bicker at each other. It's written so well, and it's so sweet, and then you get into some of the most romantic scenes in the whole VN and the confession. Oh man, it's the whole it's a light enemies to lover kind of thing, and it's just so good, man. Chris is like, that developing romance in her route was like one of the highlights and already a VN I love so much.
We would say this is an example of opposites attract.
Absolutely. And it was all the better for it.
Hey. You know what? I really wanted, and it's nice that we saved that that period for the last. I wanted to talk briefly about the tying the knot and beyond phase relationship. Because that oftentimes is just before the VN ends. Like, yeah, you achieved the marriage ending, bye. Right?
Yeah.
Now, uniquely, I prepare an example. So I need to go back to my roots. Okay? No facade anymore. We're done pretending I read romance, okay?
Brutal.
Evenical. Evenical starts very early on with a protagonist getting a wife from one of the heroines. And everything past that is him trying to develop relationship with his wife, including probably one of the best way of how to tie adventuring with your spouse, finding romance spots. That was such a highlight of that title. You, when adventuring with that wanderlust, going around the planet, finding the most romantic spots to just sit down and partake in just holding hands, making a picnic. That was just something I did not expect, both from the standpoint of title showing how married couple exist for the majority of the time, as well as that the most enjoyable part of Evenical would be finding romance spots and feeling a gauge, because the game had an overarching plot of something is transpiring on the scale of the world, but in the right lower corner in the game, there's a love gauge filling in, and when it fills, it literally says, no, you are done, go back to home and eat dinner with your wife. Like, what? That is so funny.
Oh,
go be wholesome. Like, what?
Silly in its own way.
That is so amazing.
Oh, that's nice. But yeah, so a whole lot of different romance available and a whole lot of different stories, and that's part of the reason why we just love visual novels so much. Even if we wouldn't necessarily call us romance fans first and foremost, there's still been all sorts of wonderful relationships that have been so heartwarming and entertaining and sometimes very silly to watch.
True.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amar.
Yeah. Thanks to all our listeners. And please tell us in the comments what is your favorite couple in VN. And with that, venture out.
Venture out.